Hey everyone, it's Mr. Wobbly94. I hope you're doing well today. I have a book review for a Stephen King book that I love tremendously. I read this one time ago, many years ago. It was my third Stephen King book I read. The first one I ever read from Stephen King was Misery, and that was back in like middle school, like 7th or 8th grade. And about a year or two later, I wanted to get into reading. I think it was about a year later. It was like the summer of 2009 or summer of 2010, somewhere in there. Anyway, I got back into reading, really wanted to get into the stuff. And I love horror. I've always loved horror, and I always heard this big name that I had never really remembered if I had read. I had forgotten that I'd read Misery, but I never read anything else horror-wise aside from Goosebumps that I grew up on and loved to death. One of the big things I kept hitting on was this name called Stephen King. And Stephen King is a classic. Everybody knows Stephen King. You may have not read a book of his, but you've probably seen a movie of his at some point, like The Shining, The Shawshank Redemption, Green Mile. He's not just a horror guy. He does some other stuff out there, too. I didn't even know he had done until I became a Stephen King fan and started reading a lot. Anyway, this is my third Stephen King book I ever read in high school. There was Pet Sematary that I was reading side by side with this at the time. And this is a longer book. This is 730 pages long. And that book would be Stephen King's Bag of Bones. Now, there is the original cover that I do think is very majestic and beautiful. I do have a copy of that, if not two of them, floating around here because I love Bag of Bones. This and Duma Key are very well tied to be my favorite Stephen King book of all time. I think there is nothing more passionately written, more beautiful, more interesting, more scary than those two books, Duma Key and Bag of Bones. They're just terrifying. I love the character set. I think every character in here is great. You have some great villains, you have some great supernatural stuff in here. Yeah, it's kind of one of those books I wish there was more of a supernatural-less book and had more of the straight-up dramatic situations that are happening in this book. But I'll tell you this, if you've not read Bag of Bones, it's not like any other Stephen King book. I'll tell you that up front. If you like more of the, again, Green Mile, Shawshank Redemption, Stand By Me type of stories from Stephen King that he has written those, with different titles and whatnot. If you're more familiar with stories like that and you like more of that kind of thing from Stephen King, you might really love this, even though it has some supernatural stuff thrown in there, like Green Mile. This is such a sad, depressing book. It will hit you in a way that most books won't. And there's a couple of things in here that will last for a long time. There was a particular character death that when I read this book for the first time back in the day, it stuck with me, and it stuck with me all this time. It made me love this book even more than I already did when I was reading it. And I wanted to reread it this year. Of course, I had a week-long, or not week-long, but kind of a Labor Day weekend type of thing out in Tennessee. Just enjoyed some time off with my wife in a cabin and some family, and it was just a great, great, great time. I wanted to read this and catch up on it. I started reading this about a month ago. Had a slow week or slow month or whatever with a lot of stuff happening in my life. Really had to slow down on what kind of time I had for reading in my day-to-day life. A lot of little chores popping up, a lot of little issues with my car and stuff popping up I had to fix. I wanted to have more time to sit down and really dig into this, and of course I did a couple of nights at the cabin in Tennessee. 730 pages long, really thick Stephen King book, and I will say this too, this is my favorite Stephen King cover ever. I think it is the most beautiful, beautiful art I've ever seen in my life. Who was the cover artist for this? Can I find that real quick? Is it going to be on the inside? Maybe. Let's see. Cover illustration by Tom Hallman. Everyone needs to hire Tom Hallman. If I ever get more books published one day, I want Tom Hallman to do my covers, because this is just beautiful, man. How could you not fall in love with that cover? It's so gorgeous. Anyway, as the cover kind of indicates, this is a mixture of a love story. It's probably my favorite romance story I've ever read in my life. I haven't read many romance books and stuff, but when it comes to like movies and my little bit of experience with that subgenre or genre, whatever, in general, this is probably my favorite thing I ever read when it comes to romance. It is just amazingly sweet, amazingly sad, Nicholas Sparks, eat your heart out type of stuff. It's scary, because it has a little bit of a supernatural element in there. I know a lot of folks are like myself, and a lot of the time I kind of consider myself more of a fan of Stephen King when he sticks directly to just straight dramatic stuff. No supernatural stuff, no monsters, creatures, anything like that. When it comes to those types of books that you're kind of sad that it has supernatural stuff in there, this is the best of the best. This and Duma Key, being tied for my favorite of Stephen King's work, are pretty much tied for also the two best of having supernatural things kind of tied into the story of a basic dramatic story. This is everything from a love story to grief and loss to a child custody case with drama, tension there, all kinds of stuff. It is amazing, has some of my favorite characters of all time in any kind of fiction I've read. My favorite Stephen King character, Mike Noonan, is the main character. It's written in first person, by the way, as Mike is telling you the story of what's been happening in his life all the way through the whole story, basically. It's a big old book. Like I said, it's a big old book. I have quite a few copies of this. Like I said, I don't know if I mentioned it in this one. I tried to record this video at first, and then I stopped, decided to kind of start up a new one. I bought another copy of this for the Tennessee trip also, that I read a little bit before the Tennessee trip. But I had a blast, man. I just feel like, you know, the thing with books, and the thing was with certain movies and TV shows and things that I love and I've watched with people I love around me, you have these memories that linger. And let's say you go 10 years without seeing It's a Wonderful Life. Let's say it's your favorite movie, like how it is mine. And 10 years later, you're thinking, I haven't experienced that in a long time. I miss those people. I miss those characters. I want to go back and watch that again, or read that again in this case, and really just explore those people again. Get to meet them all over again. Get to just remind myself who they are, what they've been over these years, that kind of thing. It's a weird thing, but if you're a reader, I think you experience that a lot more than people realize. This is a great example of a book that did that to me. I picked it up again, fell in love with Mike Noonan all over again, the main character. He's a writer. He's basically telling a story about how he recently lost his wife, and it covers like that 4-year span after he lost his wife that he's been struggling with writer's block and everything else. His wife just had like an accidental death. She just had like an aneurysm and died in the street in the middle of a kind of a car wreck situation on a hot day outside. Now Joe, his wife, may or may not have been pregnant as well, and Mike and her had trouble for many years trying to have a child. They had a name picked out, they had all kinds of things picked out. And when Joe died and Mike found out she had been pregnant, he was curious about whether she had cheated on him or not. So the thing is, this is the tragedy aspect of the story. You have a loved one that you love tremendously, a wife even, somebody you're one person with, under God. And this person dies, and you don't even have answers or questions, or you have questions but you don't have answers to what happened. Did they cheat on me? What? Who are you supposed to talk to? Who are you supposed to talk to? So Mike is struggling with writer's block for about 4 years, I believe is what it was. And he talks with family, keeps in track with his brothers-in-law and whatnot. He has plenty of them. I think Joe had like 5 or 6 or 7 brothers, something like that. It was quite a big family. And Mike keeps in touch with these guys, especially one in particular named Frank. And they kind of keep up with him, make sure he's doing okay, help him out. A lot of friends and family try to help Mike out as well. Now, Mike and Joe are rich. Mike is a very well-known author. Most people he comes across know his books. And when he goes back to his cabin that he and Joe owned on a place, I forgot where it was. I think it was, I don't remember where it was. I'm not even going to try. But it's a place that they nicknamed Sarah Laughs, based on a lady who was a very famous, kind of blues, kind of not blues singer named Sarah Tidwell. She kind of gets involved in the story quite a bit too, even though she's been dead for a long time. I think the Sarah Tidwell aspect, by the way, just an offshoot, shouldn't have been in the book. I think the book would have been better as a non-supernatural story, but I love the supernatural aspects. If you had chopped that out, it would have taken out about a third of the book, frankly. This is one of my favorite ghost stories ever. And I will not mention that terrible, terrible, terrible Pierce Brosnan adaptation of this movie, or this book. That was one of the most gut-wrenchingly irritating things I've ever experienced in my life, because I explained to people over and over again, I was like, don't watch that piece of crap, because I was excited. I told everybody to watch it, and then it comes out first night. It was a 2-night miniseries, and that Bag of Bones miniseries was so bad. I will never forget it, and I hope it never gets remade, because it will never be as good as the book. You couldn't even make a TV show and probably make it any good. There's too many weird internal things that needed to happen. I also recently bought Bag of Bones on the digital Amazon Prime thing. I plan on watching that at some point again, after it's been like 10 years. I'm not excited about that. As much as I cheered on that movie, and I knew Mick Garris would do a good job with it. Mick Garris, I don't know what he was thinking, man. I love his Shining remake. I love his miniseries for The Stand. I love his Desperation miniseries. You know, Mick Garris is not an idiot. He knows what he's doing, and he does well at what he does. I don't know what he was thinking. Bag of Bones was terrible. I think Stephen King even put the teleplay together like he did with The Shining and The Stand for him. It was bad. It was really bad. Anyway, getting along, Mike is dealing with this grief even 4 years later of missing Joe. It's gotten better, but not by much. He can't really date anybody at all. He's kind of partially flirted around a few years after Joe had passed away. It just wasn't really working out. He didn't meet anybody for dates, didn't ask anybody out, anything like that. He just really couldn't take that, you know what I mean? And Joe was a very loving, lively person. And Mike reminds me so much of myself and what I've turned into as an adult. You know, I kind of read this in high school. I wasn't really an adult yet. I was getting right on the verge of that. And as I've gotten older, I find myself being more and more like Mike. Almost 10 years later, I feel more like this man, not entirely, but most of the time. Just how he acts, how he reacts to things, the way he thinks. Not that I think I'm smart. Mike is a smart character, in my opinion. I think he's just a lovable guy, a serious guy most of the time, but he has quite a sense of humor. It's very dark, and it's kind of Stephen King just playing Stephen King, pretty much. And I like that about him. Pierce Brosnan fits the look of Mike when he was playing in the miniseries. I don't think, from what I remember, that the voice or anything really matches, because Pierce would keep jumping into his Irish accent every once in a while, and it just... what in the world? Anyway, so this is kind of a ghost story. Sarah Laughs, the cabin I just told you about, may or may not be haunted. Mike starts hearing a crying boy. He has a moose that has a bell around its neck that he has up on the wall. The bell rings sometimes. There's this terrifying scene of a cellar on the staircase to the cellar that Mike is in the dark, and he hears tapping, and he tries to communicate with this thing, kind of like you see on these terrible ghost hunter shows. But it was so effective. It was so effective. It was one of the best, most terrifying scenes Stephen King has ever written. Hands down, no questions asked. One of his best horror moments he's ever created. Ever crafted. One of my favorites. Easily. You have the alphabet letters on the fridge that get moved around all the time. He has them spread out in kind of a circle. And every time he comes in the kitchen, a lot of the time he'll have different messages written that don't really make sense all the time, but sometimes they do. Now, eventually, Mike, when he's driving, comes across a little girl, a little 3-year-old girl, that's running across the street out in traffic, almost probably about to get run over if she would be at the wrong turn at the wrong time. He runs out there, he picks her up and saves her. It turns out that she belongs to another lady. By the way, the little girl's name is Kyra. Apparently, she belongs to another lady, her mom, who is very young compared to Mike. Mike is probably 40 or 50, somewhere in there. Maddie is the mom, and she's probably in her early 20s, like 20, 21, somewhere in there. She's not very old. Maddie immediately kind of has like a little bit of a crush on Mike, and Kyra just adores Mike, easily. Just absolutely adores him, loves talking to him, thinks he's funny. They have these inside jokes that he and Kyra develop immediately. I love that kid. I think the way Stephen King writes that little girl is so good. Of course, he had kids and stuff. They were grown by the time he wrote this book, but those kids, well, Kyra in general, feels like a kid. It feels like Stephen King knew how to write that, how they talk, how they act, the jokes, the copying of the person, the family, or whatever, their mom, their mom's boyfriend, the dad, whoever. And Stephen King captures that so well. Now, basically, this young woman, Maddie, is caught into a child custody case with her in-laws because her husband died, and the in-laws are very, very rich, particularly the father. I think the mother or whatever died, but the father, Max, is still around, Max DeVore. He is a villainous scumbag. I hate Max. Max is such a terrible, terrible, mean person. I love to hate him. He's great as a villain. Getting into his family history and stuff was even interesting, which how often do you find yourself interested in that? A lot of the time when I read books, I skip that part because I don't care. But Max DeVore is terrifying. He has a lot of just evil in him, just plumb out an evil, evil character. He has an assistant, something Whitmore. I don't remember her name, but she's also pretty rough and evil, but she's also just kind of a henchman type of thing. Now, again, there's a little bit of supernatural element here. I do wish that it was not in the book, period. I love it. I think that you would have missed out on that scary staircase, whatever it is, cellar situation. I think that was just wonderful. But the book, I think, would have done better without all that. I think the writing style is better than it's ever been in a Stephen King book. I think this is comparable writing style to what Stephen King typically does, but it's more relatable to me to Stephen King's It and how he writes characters there, even though it's in first person here. Just the way he writes certain things, Stephen King can tell a story in such an incredible way that no one else can really pull off most of the time. And when people try to do it that way, it doesn't work as well. The only person I've ever seen kind of do their own style and also pull this off is Jonathan Mayberry. Everybody else I've ever seen try to do this doesn't do it well. It's not good. It feels very cardboardish, very 2D, not 3D. It doesn't work. Stephen King pulls it off even better here. I think that's why Mike Noonan's probably my favorite Stephen King character of all time. I know he's not like a unique character like Tom Cullen, who says so many funny things and is just so cute and adorable. I know he's not like that. I know that Mike is not like Nick Andros from The Stand also, the deaf mute. He's not like unique characters like that. He's not like a unique villain like Jack Nicholson's of Jack Torrance. He's nothing like that kind of character. He's just his own man. I love how Mike is a man about things. He's just a cool guy. I just love him to death. I don't know how to explain it. If you haven't read Bag of Bones, I don't know what to tell you. Mike Noonan is like the best character ever. I love Jo when you're talking about memories of her. It's almost you could picture these things even though Jo's not in the story. She's dead. You're reading about her from Mike and the stories that he tells. And again, that whole cheating thing, the mystery behind that's a little bit here. There's a little bit of a mystery thing about Mike and different things you'll hear from house cleaners and stuff. And people, when he comes back to the place where the cabin is, he's hearing from locals and stuff about how they saw Jo go here or there. And maybe that was a person she had cheated on Mike with, possibly. You don't really know. And that mystery drags you through the story, and it's so good. I will tell you this. Again, there's a death in here that really, really upset me the first time I read it. It actually made me cry. It's the only book that ever made me really cry, honestly. But the third act, right after that death happens, and I won't spoil anything for you, but the third act after that death happens I'm referring to, that really, I think reading it this time, almost 10 years later, I think the first time I took it in, it worked a lot better than the second time. It's been a long time since I watched it or read it. I kind of forgot a lot of things. A lot of stuff I was confusing with what was done in the miniseries, like a shower thing, which was stupid. But with this book, I think the third act, the overall conclusion of the story, is a little wild, a little bit more complex. I think Stephen King pulled it off better than most people would pull off, right? If anybody else wrote that same exact story, or that ending, I think Stephen King is the only one who could pull it off. Other people would mess that up and drop the ball real quick. Or they would just quit the book, probably, and never release it. It's a very complex ending, very bizarre how Stephen King goes about. Again, this is where I come into saying it reminds me a lot of how It was written. It jumps back and forth between characters being kids and adults. The way Stephen King does that is using italics. A lot of here are visions between this time and this time. Stephen King uses a lot of italics there, and I think it works. It just gets a little confusing sometimes. Certain things are not detailed. There's a little bit of an H.P. Lovecraft type thing here when Stephen King's writing the finale of this book. And personally, I'll tell you this, I think the ending is very satisfying. I know a lot of people give Stephen King a lot of crap and say that his endings are terrible. Even before the car wreck, people were saying that about him sometimes, from what I can tell online. I personally think that the book's ending is fantastic. It's like Doom McKee. I said the same thing about Doom McKee. I think Doom McKee and Bag of Bones have some of the best, most satisfying, most sad and depressing endings of any Stephen King work out there. Some of the best in fiction I've ever read in my life. Those endings work with those types of stories. Otherwise, you just have another bland, by-the-numbers, systematic ending, which wouldn't really resound with me the way these endings do. They work really well, and this one works really well. I don't want to tell you too much. It might sound like I'm dancing around things. Of course, this is a spoiler-free channel, but I try to keep it pretty thorough. I try to keep it very slow-paced and just calm and relaxed while I talk to you about these things. But I will say straightforward, I think it works better for me than it would for most people. I think a lot of folks would lose interest in that third act and say he dropped the ball there. I don't think that's the case, though. I really think you should give it the benefit of the doubt and really try it. It's a great book. It's a great, great book. It has great characters, great confrontation. Again, that whole child custody thing between Maddie and her in-law, father-in-law, whatever, Max DeVore, where he wants custody of her little daughter, his granddaughter. It's tragic, and it's sad, and it's crazy. There's some twists in here you would never see coming, but the kind of tension and twist that we have. There's certain characters like John, the lawyer, that teams up with Mike to help Maddie, because Mike, he kind of has a crush on Maddie, but it's not just about that. It's about doing the right thing and helping somebody when they need it, because she's got the whole town against her, right? Even with Mike picking up the little girl out of the street, he feels like the whole town is already judging the wife, or the mom, even more, Maddie, and saying, like, hey, she's a terrible mom. She let her kid escape the house and run out into the traffic, even though it wasn't very far away from the house. I love these characters. I love them so much. I don't think Bag of Bones ever needs a sequel, which is a good thing. I don't think they've ever announced it, and hopefully we never get one. There's not every time that you can get a Dr. Sleep out of something. Dr. Sleep, I think, was very good compared to The Shining, which I did not enjoy as much as Dr. Sleep. But overall, when it comes to Bag of Bones, again, tied for like my favorite Stephen King book. I have loved this since I read it. I've read many, many, many Stephen King books, if not half of his work since then. And I don't think anything comes close to it. I really don't. I know people love The Shining. People think it's terrifying. I haven't read that in a long time either. I read that about a year after I read this for the first time. I don't think that resonated with me as much. I think Stephen King's It is extremely fantastic. The ending is not perfect. It's got some weird stuff in there, like, you know what I mean. You probably know exactly what I'm thinking about. There's some things in there I don't really like that don't make it a perfect book for me, but I think that overall that book is even more engaging because of all the character stuff there. Stephen King is extremely talented, and the fact that he can write so many different types of stories is just unbelievable to me. How do you even do that? You know, but Stephen King can do that. He can do that, and he does it well. And Bag of Bones, I think, is the greatest example of that. If people tell you that Stephen King is just a horror writer, show them Shawshank Redemption or Different Seasons, which is the 4 short story novella collection thing with Shawshank Redemption, the Stand By Me story, I forgot what it's called, whatever that was called, The Body, that's what it was called, The Body. Show them things like that, show them things like Green Mile, show them things like Bag of Bones. They can't argue that point anymore, even though this is kind of scary sometimes, including The Dust Catcher, which I'm not going to tell you what that is or explain it, but if you've read the beginning of the book and you hear about the Dust Catcher, you know what I'm talking about. That's a scary, scary piece of imagery right there. Stephen King outdid himself with this. I think it's a fantastic book. It may not be perfect, but to me it's pretty close, man. I really love this. I love it to death. It's sad, it's wonderful. Again, the endings, the twists, all those things hit just as well the second time, almost 10 years later, where I forgot so many things. It hit even better this time than it did last time because I was able to see some of the foreshadowing of certain things that were coming up and didn't even realize what Stephen King was building up to yet. For it just, all of a sudden I was like, oh, that's right, you know? I love the book so much. I can't even explain it to you how great this is. If you have not read this and you're a Stephen King fan, you have missed out, my friend. You need to read this and Do McKee. That's your homework for my channel. Pick them up. Pick them up, read them, tell me what you think. Anyway, Stephen King's Bag of Bones, favorite cover right here. One of my favorite books of all time, easily, probably my top 10 favorite books of all time. I love it to death. I would like to read this again, maybe next year, maybe once a year, something like that, but I doubt I will, because I run out of time during the summer. I get too busy with vacations and everything else. Even so, what are your thoughts on Bag of Bones? Put your thoughts and comments down below, folks. I would love to hear what you guys have to say about this. If I had to rate this on a 5-star basis, I would probably give Bag of Bones probably 5 out of 5. I love it. I love it tremendously. I hate that the other year where we had that like 20-year anniversary release or whatever, the new hardcover they put out was such a cheap piece of crap. I didn't buy one, but I saw some people's videos online and they looked abysmal. Now, for a collector of a book that I love, I would probably pick it up myself just to have it for the collection. But it was terrible. So this book deserves more respect. For the 30-year anniversary, we should get something much, much, much better in my opinion. I cannot believe more people are not talking about this book when they're Stephen King fans. People kind of mention them in passing. There are people who I thought would love this, like Travis McBee, who for whatever reason hated it, and it surprised me that that was the case because of how good it was. I don't know. Bag of Bones, what did you think about it? Put your thoughts and comments down below. Once again, I would love to hear what you have to say about it. This was fun, and it was crazy and scary and tense and sad and depressing and makes me grieve about certain things and certain characters, and grieve over characters like Mike. Mike goes through so much in this book, whether it be the 4 years before the book starts up, or what happens during the year or 6 months or whatever it is while he's in Sarah Laughs in that cabin dealing with his writer's block and stuff. I just love this man so much, and I love the ending. It's great. Anyway, put your thoughts and comments down below once again. Let me know what you think about it. That was a great read for being in Tennessee with all the cabins and stuff out there in the woods. It was great. It was freaking great. Anyway, 5 out of 5 stars for me. Let me know what your rating would be down in the comment section down below. Who's your favorite character in the book? Who's your favorite villain or whatever? What'd you think about the supernatural stuff being incorporated in here? I'd love to hear all that down below. Thank you for watching. God bless you today, and goodbye.